Hi, my name is Tom and welcome to my channel Integral Views. So how much do illegal migrants cost the UK per year? Many people will be familiar with figures that are associated to like hotel costs and HMOs, and then cash that's given to asylum seekers, and the figure that's kind of bandied around in media is about £4 billion, right? But the thing is, who's tracking the cost to the NHS? Who's tracking the cost to the education system? Who's tracking the cost to the judiciary? Or how about the infrastructure, the roads, etc., right? Who's tracking all of that costs? Basically nobody, right? That's what I've discovered. And so in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a full costing. This is part of a 6-part series on illegal migration that I'm doing. In the first video, I talked about my experience of having an illegal migrant hotel open up 200 meters away from my house. And then in the second part of this series, I spoke about, the numbers of illegal migrants in the UK. I came up with an estimate of around 3 million. I think the UK government really dramatically underestimates the number of illegal migrants in the UK. And I think a lot of the data I'm going to go through in this video in trying to figure out costs really support that view. Of course, it's not just about economics, right? There's social costs, there's cultural costs, there's many different kinds of impacts on people in the UK from illegal migration. But it's important for us to monitor the economics, of course, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to end, by the end of this video, we will have an understanding of the true cost of illegal migration in the UK, and 4 billion is a drop in the ocean, let me tell you. So this video is basically part 2 in the series of 6 on illegal migration, right? And in my next series, I'm going to talk about legal migration and the costs of legal migration. For many years, and actually decades, we were told that legal migration has an economic benefit, but a lot of the data I've discovered tells a very different story to that. Again, it's kind of faulty monitoring, not looking at the true cost across all government services, etc. So if you're interested in this kind of content, please subscribe to my channel. I'd appreciate it. Like the video if you like it. Basically what I'm working toward here, right, through this series on illegal migration and then legal migration, from an economics perspective, is I'm working toward demonstrating that the entire government deficit, so the entire UK government deficit, which sits around 100 billion or more, which has been basically increasing and contributes to our national debt and has huge interest payments that are really holding the UK back economically and in many different ways. All of that deficit can be attributed to the cost of legal and illegal migration. This video is the first part of demonstrating that, and I'll go on to the legal migration costs in my next series. I find, and I'm sure a lot of you find, that when people support open borders and the asylum system, they only look at the kind of positive side from their perspective, yeah? So they think there's people in need, let's be nice, and let's help people, but they never look at the downside. They never look at the kind of economic costs and all the other social costs associated with it. And I think a lot of the reason for that is because a lot of these costs are, the economic costs at least, they're embedded, they're buried within different governmental budgets. So I'm going to demonstrate, I'm going to pick it apart, and I'm going to show you what the cost is. All right, enough of a preamble, yeah? So let's get into the actual costs. We can start this very easily looking at this. So this is the annual report and accounts from 2024 to 25 from the Home Office. Just a quick note to say, I'm not looking at the cost for refugees. I'm not looking at cost for anyone for ILR. This is purely just my estimate of 3 million illegal migrants in the UK. So what this shows in these accounts, yeah, is £4 billion in 2024. And we're going to look at 2024 only throughout this video. £4 billion associated with spend on hotels, HMOs, and then like spending money given to asylum seekers. And that's the number you'll see in the media a lot, £4 billion, but it really is the tip of the iceberg. Okay, so that's like direct Home Office reported costs associated with asylum seekers, but there's much more to it, of course, right? So what about legal costs? Now, as we go through this, the legal costs, keep in mind that our Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the London Mayor Sadiq Khan, and our Attorney General Lord Hermer all built careers within human rights law. So this is their area of expertise. This area is where they built their entire careers, basically. Okay, so keep that in mind. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a picture of the legal costs associated with the asylum system in the UK, right? So in 2024, there are 108,000, roughly, people who claimed asylum in the UK. 36,500 of those then appealed a rejected asylum claim, right? Now, if we do the maths on this, what we find is that, so each claim stage, so people who put in an asylum claim, that costs around £500. Now, this isn't paid by them, this isn't paid by the asylum, this is paid by us. Okay, so £500 times 108,000 roughly, you get £54.1 million just for the claim stage, right? Then you've got those appeals, right? So you had 36,500 odd appeals that went through. And that's when the initial claim is rejected, then they do this appeal, okay? So, and those cost around £2,000 each, roughly. So 36,500 times 2,000, and you get £73.1 million within 1 year. But there's more, right? So then you've got tribunal administration costs, and this is like clerks, you know, and kind of administration of all of that activity. And the costs associated with that is £1,500. So, and those are associated with the appeals cases, right? So you got 36,500 times 1,500, and then you get to 54.8 million. Okay. 54.1 million, 73.1 million, and then 54.8 million. And you add all of those together and you get a grand total of 182 million. But that is far from all in terms of the legal costs. Because of course, judges need to be paid salaries. These cases need to be heard in courts. Those courts need to be run generally, right? So we need to add all of that and some other things as well. So all of that basically sits within HM Tribunal Service. For short, it's abbreviated to HMCTS, okay? And the budget for that department, for that whole area, was £2.3 billion in 2024. So we need to basically figure out how much of that 2.3 billion can be associated with asylum cases, okay? So immigration and asylum cases make up 8% of the entire caseload, okay? So the entire HMCTS caseload, 8% of that is asylum and immigration cases. So we take 2.3 billion and then we get 8% of that, and that's 184 million, okay? So 184 million that we can attribute to these immigration and asylum cases. Then there's even more, okay? So basically, many of our court systems have this big backlog of cases. And it's really not helping that we have like 108,000 asylum cases that are going in, having to be processed by our courts every year. So, but that backlog of cases that exists, that has a cost associated with it. And that basically manifests in terms of like overtime pay, judges' salaries who are sort of brought in to do temporary work, and there's many other things like file storage and just general inefficiencies. And the Ministry of Justice estimated that it's 10% of the entire 2.3 billion that can be attributed to this backlog cost. So what I'm doing here, okay, is I'm saying that if you removed all asylum cases and that we weren't having that kind of burden and that load on our legal system, then the backlog would not exist, and I'm going to demonstrate that next, okay? So the whole 230 million, so that's 10% of 2.3 billion, can be associated and attributed to the existence of the entire asylum system within our court system. So now we've got a legal cost, right? And what that legal cost is made up of is 182 million in the whole tribunal case cost. So you've got the, we went through it first, it was the initial asylum claim and then the appeals process and some admin related to that. That's 182 million. And then you've got the backlog court cases. So you've got the caseload, that's a backlog. and that's 230 billion. And then you've also got 184 million, which is HMCTS operational costs. So that's the cost for the judges' salaries, the court operating costs basically. And if you add all of that together, then you've got 596 million pounds. That's close to 600 million pounds that this is costing us just within the legal system. So I started to think, what if they didn't exist at all, right? We've got that 600 million pounds. What could we do with that money? Okay, so I spoke about backlogs of cases in various courts, right? What I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk through those backlogs and what would happen if we got rid of all asylum cases and then we used that money to clear these backlogs that we have in various courts. Let's take a look at tribunal courts first. And this is the backlog over time. You can see that it's just increasing and increasing over time. This is completely unsustainable. Something has got to give, hasn't it? Obviously. So we're just getting more and more of backlog of cases every year. Okay, so that's tribunal courts. And the impact across our court system is huge. Remember, like asylum and immigration, they happen in these tribunal courts, the appeals. But we're going to look at other court systems as well. And let's start that with the magistrates court. So magistrates court is like the first port of call for criminal law, criminal offences, okay? And 95% of all offences in this category are processed in the magistrates court. And this is the backlog for magistrates courts. And you can see again, up and up and up and up. So that again is completely unsustainable. It's only going in one direction. We're building up an increased backlog. And that means people are waiting longer and longer to have their cases heard. Now another court is called the Crown Court. So when criminal cases are not sort of resolved within the magistrates court or they're very serious types of crime, then they go into the Crown Court, right? And this is where like these types of crimes will end up. And again, the backlog is going up and up and up and up and up over time. Clearly, they don't have the capacity that's needed. And what these backlogs amount to is that in the Crown Court, where these serious types of crime are basically judged, right? The average length of waiting between an offence taking place and then the case getting heard in Crown Court is 360 days. So that's nearly a year of waiting. Imagine that from a victim's point of view. It's just absolutely unsustainable. And this is a perfect example of if you only look at the plus side. So if you only think, I support asylum and asylum system and that's it, right? But you don't see the knock-on effects of that. This is a great example of that, right? Because it's costing just in the legal system £600 million a year. And where could that £600 million go, right, if we didn't put it into the asylum system? Well, if we applied that £600 million to the backlog of tribunal courts, to the magistrates court and the Crown Court, so all of those different types of crime where the backlogs are going up and up and up, if we applied that £600 million there instead, we would clear all of those backlogs within 1 year. Now, of course, the thing is about that is that, yeah, you have to train different lawyers, but it's really a matter of where are your priorities, yeah? So I personally would be more than happy with the huge number of these human rights lawyers, where human rights basically seems to mean just not work in favour of British interests, not work in the favour of British citizens. I would be more than happy with a lot of them being out of job. Anyway, let's go through that in a little bit of detail from a data perspective, right? So we've got our £600 million saving because we've got rid of the entire asylum system. Okay, so we've made that saving in the legal system. Well, we've got 361,000 case backlog in magistrates court. They're about £250 each. That's 90 million to clear all of that roughly. And then you've got Crown Court cases, 78,000 backlog, about £2,000 each, 156 million to clear all of that. Tribunal cases, 745,000, £400 each, 298 million, add it all together and you're well within our £600 million budget. So, the decisions can be made. So far, we've got our £4 billion from the Home Office accounts for the hotels, HMOs and cash given to asylum seekers. Then we've got our £600 million from the legal system, so 4.6 billion, but that is still nowhere near the full amount. Next, I want to talk about healthcare costs, right? Because of course, illegal migrants have a huge burden on the NHS. Now, the case I'm making is that there are 3 million or more illegal migrants in the UK, okay? Now, let's get some context of the NHS. You'll hear politicians like Zach Polansky of the Green Party and many others say the NHS is so underfunded, it's just unsustainable. And the reality is that the NHS is extremely well funded. So have a look at this chart. What this shows is inflation adjusted NHS spending, or basically government healthcare spending from 1997 to present day. I chose 1997 because that's when Tony Blair took office, okay? That's when everything changed. All right, so right in 1997, total government healthcare spending was less than £100 billion. That's inflation adjusted, okay? Today, it's over 255 billion. So a hell of a lot more, way more than double. Of course, in that time, the GDP of the country has grown, but let's look at healthcare spending as a proportion of GDP, shall we? In 1997, the government-funded healthcare was around 5% of our GDP in 1997. But today, government spending on healthcare is 9% of our GDP, roughly, okay? So it's, as a percentage of our GDP, it's almost doubled. So we're spending a huge amount more proportionally. Now, part of that increase is because of an aging population, but nowhere near all of that. That is a ridiculous increase in spending on government-funded healthcare, isn't it? Okay, now, what we're going to do, right, is we're going to try to get like a picture of what the likely healthcare costs from illegal migration are so that we can add that to our tally. We're going to use the figure of 3 million illegal migrants. We're doing that through all of this, and if you want to see why, go and look at my second video in this series. And we'll start this here with the statement from the BMA. So what this refers to is primary care. Primary care is like GP appointments and then prescriptions, some like nurse visits, stuff like that. And what it says, refugees, asylum seekers and refused asylum seekers can register for and receive primary care free of charge. This also includes A&E, by the way, so accident emergency. So basically, anybody in the UK, illegal migrant or not, they can all receive primary care, GP services, that kind of stuff. Now, as for secondary care, okay, secondary care is like through consultants, hospital care. It's much more like intensive and expensive types of medical attention and care, right? So again, this is from the BMA on secondary care. All refugees and asylum seekers with an active application or appeal can access the full range of secondary care services free of charge in any nation in the UK. Now, in addition, in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, any person who has previously made a formal application for asylum, regardless of the outcome, is entitled to access secondary care free of charge. So in Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, you can make an asylum claim, have it rejected, and still have access to a full suite of healthcare, just like any British citizen can. So, let's do some maths real quick and get like a conclusion from the healthcare costs of illegal migration in the UK. And the way that I've done this, I've basically taken the total amount of healthcare spending, then assumed 3 million illegal migrants, and then taken it as a proportion of the total costs of each of these different areas. Okay, so primary care and prescriptions, the cost of illegal migrants in that area, that's like GPs and prescriptions, £1.05 billion. It's a lot. Secondary care share. What I've done with this is I've just ignored all of Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales doing the secondary care for failed asylum seekers, and I've only looked at active asylum seekers to be as conservative as possible. And that's 290 million in secondary care. Then we've got the A&E, so accident emergency, proportionally, it's 180 million for illegal migrants in the UK. Then there's infrastructure costs and admin overhead. So I've basically done some calculations on different types of infrastructure and admin costs in the NHS, nasty stuff. And I've come up with the figure of £760 million. Who else has actually factored in and spoken to the public about a proportion of the infrastructure and admin cost of healthcare that's assigned to illegal migrants? So if we add all of this together, we get £2.3 billion. So let's add £2.3 billion to our running total, and we're now at £6.9 billion, but we're still just scratching the surface. What about education costs? Now, going through this, I was quite surprised by this. Effectively, what I found out is that schools are not allowed to ask parents or anybody for the immigration status of a certain child. So basically what schools are advised to do by the government, have a look at this. It says the admission authorities for state-funded schools, maintained schools and academy schools must not check the immigration or nationality status of foreign national children as a precondition for admission. Admission authorities for state-funded schools must not refuse to admit a child on the basis of their nationality or immigration status or remove them from the roll basis, must not ask to see passports or other immigration information as a condition of administration. So effectively what this is saying is don't check. It's saying to schools, don't check. And when effectively what they're doing is they're saying it's the parents' responsibility to self-report if they're there illegally. Yeah, like that's going to happen. So we have to get some kind of estimate of the education costs of illegal migrants in the UK. Okay, so I've based this on the Department for Education data, and if you look across primary school, secondary school, and then you like factor in support for English language requirements, things like that, you end up with a figure of £5,500 per student per year. So if we say there are 3 million illegal migrants in the UK right now, then we're going to have to figure out like what ratio of those would be children. I'm saying it's about 30%, but again, this is just kind of ballpark, right? Just a guess, effectively. But let's say it's 30%, because we know that people who come from foreign countries have higher fertility rates. So we're going to say 30%, right? So what that would give us, 30% of 3 million, is 900,000. That would mean 900,000 illegal migrant children within our school system. Now the cost of those 900,000, so you've got 900,000 times 5,500 per pupil per year, and then you get £4.95 billion per year on education for illegal migrants in the UK. Of course, the thing is, right, that they're taking up school places, and it's the same with the NHS. They're taking up treatment facilities, and we have a certain capacity. So when you increase numbers of people who are not supposed to be in the country and are kind of blind to the government, then of course you add burden to all of those different systems. So we got our 4.95 billion for education. Let's add that to our running tally, and we're at 11.85 billion, but we're still not done. Okay, this next part is really important, and it really is like the canary in the coal mine. From my perspective, this adds a lot of kind of weight to the argument that the government is seriously underestimating the number of illegal migrants in the UK. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be calculating the tax gap from having illegal migrants in the UK. What that means is, like, if people are working in the economy illegally, cash in hand, then no national insurance is being paid, no income tax is being paid, and we're losing money through tax. But there's other costs as well that sit within this. Now, the HMRC predict that the tax gap, the total tax gap, is £46.8 billion. This is where it gets really interesting. So have a look at this chart here. So what this shows is the percentage of theoretical liabilities of that tax gap. And you can see that in around 2017, corporate tax shot up, okay? And out of that corporate tax, look at this graph here, you can see a huge proportion, those green bars, are small business tax. Small businesses owe a lot of tax that they're not paying. How do we know? Well, because the government basically uses a lot of different metrics to see sales and goods transfers and sort of a lot of economic data to build formulas to predict how much tax they should be getting, and they're not getting that amount of tax. And so a huge amount of that lost tax is within small businesses who aren't paying the tax that's expected of them. And this plays directly into illegal working in the UK. So when illegal migrants work, cash in hand, because they don't have a national insurance number, right? And so they don't have a visa, and so they have to find any work they can. And often that will be for small businesses in roles in like construction or hospitality, agriculture, delivery drivers, cleaners, things like that. And those industries are dominated by small businesses, right? And those are the exact businesses that we've got this huge tax gap from. And the tax gap we've got from small businesses is £14.7 billion. This whole thing is part of what's called the shadow economy. And the shadow economy is predicted to be 12.6% of the entire UK GDP. The way that this works, okay, is that when you have a business that is basically open to employing people illegally, it then leads to them not reporting the profits and paying the tax that's due on those profits. Because if they do, basically, if you have someone working illegally, they don't have a national insurance number, they're not on any systems, okay? And then if you report your profits, you've basically got to say how you made those profits, and it just wouldn't add up in the tax system. If you employ someone who's working here legally, then their data will be reported through something called the PAYE system, and it will basically create this record within HMRC that is associated with them, and then some of the business profits will be associated with them. If you don't have all of those legal workers with their PAYE data, what they're paid, what income tax is paid for them, then it's very difficult for you to report all of those profits, because then you'd be seen as a very, very profitable small business because you don't have the associated costs of workers, right? So when you employ people illegally, it incentivizes you not to pay the necessary tax on your profits. You don't report the profits, then you don't pay the business tax on those profits. I hope that made sense, quite complicated. So long story short, right, what we've got to figure out is the income tax that's lost from the illegal workers, the national insurance cost that's lost from the illegal workers, and then also the unpaid tax on business profits from the work that they're doing in those small businesses, right? I've looked at HMRC data and some academic studies, and what they basically showed was that you can come to the conclusion roughly that there's about £8,000 in business profits that are associated with every worker basically in a small business. So basically it's like £8,000 profit associated with every worker. So we take 50% of 3 million illegal migrants. Let's assume 50% of them are working. Again, we don't know, but we'll say 50%, could be more, right? 50% of 3 million illegal migrants are working. Each one of those generates £8,000 in profits for the small businesses that they're working cash in hand for, okay? That £8,000 in profits isn't reported to HMRC, so no business tax is paid on those profits. And so if we calculate that, we've got 1.5 million times 8,000. What you end up with is £2.3 billion in lost business taxes alone. But then we've also got to calculate the lost income tax and the national insurance for each worker. I'm doing employer and employee national insurance that's lost. So we've got our estimate of 3 million illegal migrants in the UK. Let's say 50% of those are working. Let's say they're working for £15,000 a year each. If you do the maths on that, lost income tax and national insurance, both employer and employee national insurance, you get to the figure of £7.5 billion lost. Now, if it was £20,000 that they're being paid a year and 70% of them were working, then you lose £20 billion in income tax and national insurance combined. 20 billion. But we're just going to use the 7.5 billion conservative figure. So we've got our 7.5 billion income tax and national insurance lost, And then we've got our 2.3 billion business tax unpaid, right? We've got 9.8 billion pounds. That's 9.8 billion pounds in unpaid taxes as a result of illegal working in the UK if there are 3 million illegal migrants here. Add that to the tally and we've got 21.65 billion pounds, but we're still not done. Next up is prisoners and prisons. There are 10,300 foreign national prisoners. That's FNOs, foreign national offenders, 10,300. And that's of a total of 88,000 prisoners in the UK. Each prisoner costs around £48,000 per year. Now the whole prison system is so full that the government is releasing people early. And this is the result. This was just from a couple of days ago. Have a look at that. I'm not going to read it out. Now, many of these foreign national offenders are from countries like Albania, Afghanistan, Sudan, Eritrea, Iraq, Iran. These are countries we see a lot of illegal migrants coming in from. The government doesn't release data on how many of these foreign national offenders are illegal migrants. Of course they don't, because they never do they? But so we've got to ballpark it. Let's say 25%. Let's say 25% of the total foreign national offenders in our prisons came here illegally. Could be higher, who knows, right? But if we say it's 25%, then we end up with a figure of £124 million spent just on that every year in the UK. That's a small amount, right, relative to some of these other figures. But I included it to show that, you know, basically this whole system, this whole situation is clogging up all of our infrastructure, clogging up prisons, the court system, the NHS, schools, etc. Okay. Now our prisons are full, and by 2026 we have 10,000 prisoner shortfall. Well, we've got 10,000 foreign national offenders in our prisons. How about we take their biometric data, deport them, and make sure they never come back? Anyway, let's add that small amount of 124 million to our running total, and we got 21.77 billion so far, but we're still not done. Now this next section, basically I went through so much data, and this video is already going to be really long, and I know it's really complicated stuff, right? So I'm just going to go through really quick, and you can pause and then look at these kind of areas and the costs associated with it as we go if you're interested. So we've got council services and local authority burden, 250 to 500 million. Welfare and benefits leakage, 500 million to 1 billion. Policing, criminal justice and border enforcement, 500 million. Social housing, pressure and rent inflation, 500 million to 1 billion pounds. Child services, safeguarding and social care, 1 billion to 1.5 billion. Fraud, identity and administrative costs, 1 to 200 million pounds. Infrastructure strain, transport, housing, local services, between 3 and 4 billion pounds. All of those figures were calculated as a percentage of the total spend if we had 3 million illegal migrants in the UK. I'm going to take the central figure of each of those different estimates, and that gives me a total of 7.25 billion pounds. Okay, so now when we add all of that together, we get this chart, right? I'll talk you through this. So all of the numbers we've been talking about through this video are in this middle column, and that says, you can see 3M at the top, 3 million. So that's assuming there are 3 million illegal migrants in the UK. That's the mid estimate, and we get 29 billion pounds in costs every year. I didn't do things like defence, okay? So I didn't do a proportionate amount of the defence budget for those 3 million people. I just covered those areas that we spoke about in this video, 29 billion pounds. But the beauty of this model is that we have fixed costs, which are the top two lines. So you've got the hotels, HMO and cash. We know those costs, they're for asylum seekers, right? And yeah, they do kind of change every year, but basically we can see those as fixed costs. And then asylum legal costs, we can see that as fixed costs as well. But the rest we can see as variable costs, okay? And what we can do with that is we can say, well, let's say there's not 3 million illegal migrants. Let's say there's 1.7 million. If we do that, then all the variable costs move down as a proportion of the total cost of each of those area, okay? And then you get 18.4 billion pounds yearly if there's 1.7 million illegal migrants in the UK. If there's 4.6 million illegal migrants in the UK, which is a plausible figure based on my last video, you get 42 billion pounds a year in cost. Okay, so my estimate is that illegal migrants cost the UK 30 billion pounds per year. Of course, illegal migration is a huge problem in the UK, right? We all know that it is. Not just the cost, the social cost, many other things, right? The crime, etc. Now, it's clogging up our court systems. It's clogging up our healthcare system. It's clogging up our schools. It's clogging up our prisons. It's adding a burden, right, on infrastructure. So it's having this huge impact on all of our kind of infrastructure in the UK. It's also driving this shadow economy. So it's driving this huge HMRC tax gap that's increasing. My opinion, essentially, is that the government has completely lost control of the borders, and not only the borders, but generally lost control of the economy. I think that they know that they've lost control, and I think that digital ID is their way to regain some kind of control. But why should we all pay in our liberty for their failures? They don't do visa overstay checks. They're not doing the kind of reporting that I'm doing here. They're not putting pieces together. They're not taking action. There's so many other things they could do rather than just implementing a digital ID. So effectively, to a large extent, I don't buy it. I don't buy that digital ID is, just for that. If I can do this, why isn't the government? Why isn't the government looking at healthcare costs, education costs, and all of these different areas and putting all of these pieces together to figure out what the actual cost of illegal migrants is in the UK, or even come up with some kind of number of how many illegal migrants are here? It's as if it doesn't exist, but clearly it does, and clearly it's having a massive impact on living standards here in the UK. So, looking at all of this, weighing up pros and cons, it is my opinion that the entire asylum system should be shut down. We should accept no more asylum seekers whatsoever. And then we don't end up in a situation of, should we accept this person or not, right? And then if we want to accept people, like we did for people from Ukraine or from Hong Kong, we should do a referendum across the country, across British citizens, who should then vote on whether we will accept a certain number, with a given number of asylum seekers, of refugees from a certain conflict. It shouldn't be this constant revolving door that's led to us completely losing control of basically the entire country. So I agree with Rupert Lowe. We should detain and deport, but I'd go further and I'd say we should get rid of the entire asylum system altogether. Because it's clear that human rights law, as it's currently constructed, is not working in British interests. It should be repealed and replaced with legislation that prioritises British citizens. Okay, that was a long one and a data heavy one, okay? That was a lot of work to pull that together. I really hope that you found that informative and valuable. I hope that I'm contributing in a good way to this overall debate. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like that video, subscribe if you're not already. If you liked it, like the video. All right, thanks for watching. Cheers.